Welcome, everyone. We're just waiting for a few more people to arrive in the space, and we'll begin this evening's talk. Welcome, everyone. It's so nice to see you here this evening. We still have a few people joining us this evening. It's an amazing turnout for the start of our Humanities New York virtual series. We're going to begin now. My name's Victoria Munro, and I have the wonderful job of being the executive director of the Alice Austen House. The Alice Austen House is a historic house in New York City on a beautiful 15-acre waterfront park that is named for its most famous resident, Alice Austen, who was born in 1866 and lived until 1952. She spent 55 years of that life with her partner, Gertrude Tate, and 30 of those years were spent living together at the Alice Austen House, which was affectionately known by her family as Clare Comfort. We haven't always had this fantastic narrative celebrated, informing our programs, and we embrace our history in the hope that we can educate other institutions to do the good work that we're currently doing. And we perhaps wouldn't be here at all today where we are as a nationally designated site of LGBTQ history without the important work of groups like the Lesbian Avengers. So we hope that this series is a catalyst for a larger body of work that truly celebrates lesbians and their work in activism and archives. And tonight we begin our 4-week series with Maxine Wolfe. Maxine, thank you so much for joining me tonight.
My pleasure.
Maxine is one of the founders of the Lesbian Avengers and has a long history of political involvement, incredible actions, so much support for the movement. And rather than hearing it from me tonight, I'm going to shepherd some questions for Maxine, and you'll hear from her about her history, how she came to being a founder of the Lesbian Avengers, their action at the Alice Austen House, which we'll hear a little more about later, and also the trajectory of her career. And I think it's just, there's so much wonderful learning to happen here, and I'm so glad that so many of you are joining tonight. And as Maxine said to me earlier when we were doing our tech check, we hope that there's some new people on board tonight too. So I'm very proud that we are expanding our mission at the Alice Austen House to take inspiration from Alice and her work and her incredible photography, and really look at others that are working in the field and that have supported the work that we do. So, Maxine, this evening, I know everyone would love to know a little bit more about your history and how you came to feeling such a strong urge, desire, and passion for activism.
I think that my passion for activism I had from a girl that I went to school with when I was 11, and who took me, and I know this always sounds strange to people, but it's true, took me to see the Weavers when they were blacklisted. And I sat in this theater that was one of the only places they could perform in. And they sang, Pete Seeger sang, "This land is meant for you and me," and I believed him. That, as silly as that sounds, it's true, and of course it brought out something that was in me from my growing up. My parents were not political people in the sense that you think about it, although I found out many years later that my grandfather was, who died long before I was in the world. Um, and but I remember asking my mother during the 19, when was it, 50 something elections, who she was voting for, because, they told us at school to ask at home. And she said she wasn't going to vote. And me, the assimilating next generation, gave her an argument and said, "What do you mean you're not going to vote?" And she said, "None of them are for us. None of them are for the working people." And so obviously that kind of sense was there to begin with, because of my family, who, despite not being what you would call political, were people who were very aware of what was happening in the world. The only thing I ever saw my parents read were the newspapers every day. So they were not people who were wrapped up in their own lives only, but knew what was going on. And that was conveyed to us. Both of my sisters, I have two sisters, one younger and one older, and both of them had the same political perspective.
I think, something that is really amazing today is that the museum is really recognized as a lesbian home. And we are now so welcoming to lesbians to come and visit. And of course, we have social media and we have the internet to communicate this. But when you were forming your networks, you didn't have that. And so often, young people, we teach GSAs at the Alice Austen House, they ask us, or they're just unaware of a time before the internet, of how you managed to communicate and find some of your people. I'd be really interested to ask that as a prelude to asking you a little bit about how the Lesbian Avengers really formed.
Well, people always ask that at the archives, and I always take them around and I show them poetry chapbooks that were done, in the 70s and the 60s. And I say to them, people come and they say, an older woman will come and she'll say, in the 70s, I did this book. And I don't know if anyone even knows it ever existed because I don't have any copies. And I always say, well, why don't we look on the shelf? And there it is. Okay. And she is shocked. And I try to explain to people that we formed groups across the United States. We formed groups into Europe. I had connections to people in various European countries without the internet. And people published things and they sent them and they got distributed throughout the United States. And then people knew that you were someone, in California. I knew there was someone in California or someone in Finland or someone in England or wherever, and got in touch with them. I wrote letters. I know that sounds so ancient, but I still write letters, in fact. And I think people always think that the current technology is the only way you ever find people. But, I always give the example of the ladies of Llangollen who were visited by Alice, what's her name? The woman from England.
In what
Why
year?
am I missing it? Anyway, who found them, in the 1800s, in the 1800s. So, but I hope people use archives to find people now. to come in and see what people are doing. And they do, they come in and they want to know, about land ownership, or they want to know about uh, different kinds of activism or housing or some topic, and they can find out and go and get in touch with those people, no matter where they are.
Maxine, can I just ask you, because in case there's people in the room that don't know about the Lesbian Her Story archives, and it's an important year for the archives.
It is. It's our 50th year.
50 years of this incredible work. Can I ask you how the archives began?
Well, it began by a group of women who were in a consciousness raising group in the Gay Activist Alliance, and who decided that nobody was doing anything about women, and they decided they would be the people to do it. They were not historians. They were not people who had studied archiving. They were just women who wanted to find out their own history. And they did. They just started looking and then gathering things and asking people. And I always think the part that I love the most about stuff that they did was they would just go to, they had some people like Mabel Hampton donated their own artifacts like books or papers, and Joan Nessel and Deborah Edel and the other people involved would go to bars. They would go anywhere there were lesbians, and they would show them what they had, because you have to build trust. People aren't going to give things to people when they think that they're going to disappear. So they went personally and asked people to contribute, showed them what they had, and by doing that, built a community of people who would support them and support them to this day. Many of those people support us. So it was a matter of community organizing then.
And trust is such a huge issue. When the Alice Austen House, they started making some gains before I joined the House and accepted an amendment to their landmark to acknowledge the LGBTQ history. But when we started doing active programming, so many people told me, no one's going to trust you. No one's going to want to work with you. And the opposite has been true. And Austen is a woman who, her archives, there are significant archives, but they were scattered and many things seemed lost to time. And because of the work that we've been doing, people have been returning things to us. And so she consistently reveals herself to us.
Right.
And we learn more every year, every month. It's this process of uncovering, because her archives hadn't been dealt with so carefully and diligently. And I feel that trust and building back trust by even, doing things like talking to you tonight is so important. And so thank you so much for telling us a little bit about the founding of the archives, and we can talk more about that work. I'd love you to tell us how you came to forming the Lesbian Avengers and what that grew out of. It's a big question.
Well, it basically grew out of frustration that no one was focusing on lesbians. At that time in New York, there was ACT UP, which was doing a lot of AIDS stuff. I mean, I did things about women and specifically about lesbians in ACT UP, but that was not what this was about. And there were women who had formed a group called, was that art group? Anyway, there was another group that was doing stuff about abortion. I had worked on reproductive rights for 15 years and I wanted to do something about lesbians. So I spoke to Sarah Schulman and she said, well, you know, why don't you, I said to her like that I wanted to do something like put up leaflets on a pole that said, you know, a lamppost that said, are you being discriminated against at work? Do you want an action done for you? Call the Lesbian Avengers. Well, not the Lesbian Avengers. I said call the Lesbian Action Hotline or something. And she said that she had spoken to Anna Simo. Anna Simo was also had an amazing place in the United States. She's a Cuban lesbian, Cuban American lesbian, who started the first lesbian theater in New York called Medusa's Revenge, and very political. And I knew who she was. And Sarah said, why don't you two have lunch and talk about something? So we did. And we decided that we would have a dinner and we would each invite people we knew who had done political work, lesbians who had done political work, and talk about what we could all do. So we did. We all asked different women that we knew. And in the end, there were 6 of us. There was Anne McGuire and Marie Honan, who also did incredible work in the Irish Lesbian and Gay Organization, and Anne Dodesky, who had been in ACT UP with me, and wait a minute, and Anna, me, well, Sarah, of course, Anna, Sarah, me, Anne, and Marie, and who am I forgetting? Nobody. I think that's it. And we met for dinner at Anna's house, and it was a foregone conclusion. We were going to do something. It wasn't even a question, even though it was supposed to be a question. It was, what are we going to do? And then Anna had the idea of doing something about the rainbow curriculum, which had been introduced into the public schools to basically broaden the history of people in the city and in the United States, which people are still fighting about today, unfortunately. And they wanted to do it because it had like 3, I think it had 3 sentences about lesbians, and there were already, I mean, gay people, and there were already people who were arguing that it should be not shown, you know, not talked about, nothing. Okay. And so we all agreed, well, we had some funny things that we thought about doing, like parachuting into Whitney Houston's wedding. And letting people know she was a lesbian, but we decided we really wanted to do serious political work. And that was, I think, an important thing. All of us wanted to do serious political work. It didn't mean that we weren't going to have fun, but we didn't want to like integrate a male bar or do something like that. We wanted to take issues of the day and put our spin on it, put a lesbian spin on it, figure out what we could do. And, you know, the rainbow curriculum was not just about gay people. It was about racial background and covering Black people and Puerto Rican people and Asian American people. It was the rainbow curriculum. So we were part of that, but it wasn't only us. And I think that was always important to us also, that the work that we did encompassed more than just us. But it was about a particular value that we held and that we thought was important. And so we decided to do this, and actually we came up with the name Lesbian Avenger, and I don't remember how. I know we were just brainstorming, and then somebody said, what about the Avengers? Because they had been big at that time in the late 80s, early 90s, and everybody went, great name, and we did it, you know. And so then Anna's son, if I remember correctly, picked out the bomb, the anarchist bomb, and that became our logo from the very beginning. So that's how we started the Avengers. And the way that we grew very quickly, we decided that the six of us would do an action no matter what. If nobody else joined us, we were going to do it. Okay. But then what we did was we made up what we called club cards then. I don't know what they call them now, but cards that they used to give out about showing up at nightclubs and lesbian clubs. And it said something like lesbians, gay women, dykes, they're only cold-blooded liars in the White House. We want revenge and we want it now. And we used a phone in my house that I had gotten for my daughters when they were teenagers because they kept using the phone and I was getting political phone calls. So, so I got them an extension. So, but I gave them their own number. And we used that and we put that on the flyer. And then we handed it out at the Gay Pride March that Sunday, that June.
And what year was
said,
that?
What
What
year was
year
that?
was that?
That was 1992. So we went to the Gay Pride March and we gave it out, but we had a principle. And the principle was that we didn't give it to anyone who was already in a group. Because those people, you know, they had their own work that they were going to do. We wanted people who would be new and who wanted to become, they wanted the Avengers to become part of who they were, as opposed to them already having allegiances elsewhere. So for that first meeting, we said, and it said, we're meeting on July 6th in the Lesbian and Gay Community Center. And we handed out 8,000 of those cards. And we handed them only out to women who were walking by themselves or who were on the sidelines. And then when we came to the meeting, 60 women showed up.
It's amazing.
60, okay? And they were ready. And they had not done, most of them had not done activism before. By the second meeting, there were people who came who had already heard about it from other people. But the first meeting had 60 people in it. And we had structured it so that everybody could take responsibility for something, that we didn't run it. We created different committees like media and logistics and things like that, that one of us would be part of. But the whole point was to pass on the skills and to let other people make the experiences. This is what the archives is about, by the way. It's the same exact philosophy. And it was a philosophy of lesbian feminism, really. And so that's what we did. And by the second and third meeting, we were just part of a group. You know, we did not run the actions. People decided what those were going to be. In fact, for instance, we had decided that we would do an action on the first day of school about the rainbow curriculum, but that was it. We didn't say where it would be, what it would look like, anything. But in that first meeting, people started talking about what it could be. And there was one group that was a research group. And they went out and they figured out that there was this school superintendent in Middle Village, Queens, who was totally homophobic and who she was anti-abortion. She was just unbelievable. And she was being very vocal about not doing this rainbow curriculum. And one of her very vocal points about it was about the fact that it had LGBT info in it. 3 lines. So we picked that place. And I think that was the other thing that we did that I always felt was important, even when I was doing reproductive rights. You don't go to Greenwich Village. You go to places that people live in that don't expect you. Because the whole point is to get to the people who otherwise would not hear what you have to say. And so even though it was scary to do that kind of thing, we did it anyway. We figured, whatever, you know, and we went out. I was working on logistics And we went out. I went out with another woman, and we went out and we just figured out where we would walk and how we would get to the school that this was in this district, a public school, an elementary school, and that we would march there from the train station down a major street in Middle Village, Queens, and go out there and then do our action, which was, if you ever want to see what it looks like, there's a video about it that's called Lesbian Avengers Eat Fire Too, and you can get it online, and it shows how we went. And one of the things that we always do, which was fun, we had a marching band, and we marched from the station singing "We Are Family." And we had balloons, and the balloons said, "Ask about lesbian lives." It was very, very pedagogic. And when we got to the school, we wanted to hand them out to the kids. So the some of the things that happened about that show you how you have to sort of stick by what you know is fine, even if people don't think so, was within the group itself. At the beginning, when there were all new people, they were like really fine about the whole idea of balloons that said, "Ask about lesbian lives." But 3 meetings in, people started saying things like, well, aren't the kids gonna be upset that that's what you're handing out? And we would say, well, if it said "save the whales," would you feel that way? Or they would say, this is going to confuse the kids on the first day of school. And at that point, very few people in that room had kids, but I had 2 kids. And I said, are you kidding? This is going to be the best first day of school they've ever had. There's going to be a marching band and balloons. I said, the rest of the school year is going to be boring as hell. Okay, but this day is going to be great. Okay. And then we had a thing that we said to people, if you don't want to do this, wait till the next action. You don't have to do every action. So when we went out there, it was really wonderful because we did what we had to do. We gave out flyers about the rainbow curriculum, and it was a very successful day, and we didn't get arrested.
I certainly know. I've got kids. If they got given a balloon, they'd be incredibly
Well,
happy.
the parents were upset. They didn't want one. We have one thing in that movie is that one of the girls took a balloon and the parents said, give it back, give it back. Okay, fine. We took it back. It wasn't, we didn't push things on anybody. We just did our thing. And we walked down that Middle Village, and people were standing. It was a shopping street, and you can see in the movie also that people were very receptive. We did not get yelled at with slurs. Nobody said, what the hell do you think you're doing here? No, people were very interested, for the same reason that the kids were interested. A marching band and lesbians? What would you not be interested in? So, and subsequently we followed that up, and that's the other thing that's important. We did other actions about the rainbow curriculum, and went to the teachers union. We did a whole range of other things. That was just the way to kick it off.
Right. I think, what you say about your organization is so important, that you really thought out how you were going to operate together. You talked through everything. It was, incredibly equitable. And these tenets that today I think are talked about so much more, the lesbian movement were really embodying. so much earlier on. And, you know, I look at Alice Austen, not to so bring it back to her, but this Victorian woman who formed all of these clubs. She was
Right.
the founder of the Staten Island Garden Club. She was the co-founder of the Staten Island Bicycle Club. You know, she had a cooking club. So she worked within her society and chose these activities that were deemed acceptable for women to do without male chaperones, and formed a safe space for her and her largely queer circle of female friends to be together and communicate and work together. And it's a really wonderful legacy, which brings me to 1994 at the Alice Austen House. And this is really where I sort of started to find out about all of this history around Alice Austen. You know, the first time I visited the Alice Austen House, I was exploring different parks and historic houses and things. And I went to the park and I entered the house, and the person said, put $3 in the wicker basket and you can have a look around. And I quickly looked around these, you know, roped off rooms that had antique furniture. And there was few small pictures on the walls. I think there was like 20 in total. I know that now. With tiny little bits of text that were illegible. And when I left, I didn't know that Alice Austen was actually a photographer. And maybe if I'd stayed longer and really tried, and I didn't know that she was a lesbian. And as a queer artist, how much would that have meant to me? So much. And so in doing this, more looking and digging into the Alice Austen archives, of course, with so many of the wonderful new staff members that we have. I'm so sorry, my dog is chewing a squeaky toy beside me. It's like animals. But yes, so yeah, looking at the archives more closely and where the archives are dispersed, and understanding who was doing the archiving, about, you know, how we actually find out this bigger story. Of course, the Lesbian Avengers were right there as well. And one of the first things I watched when I first joined the Alice Austen House as a education writer was the Barbara Hammer documentary, The Female Closet, that had she had recorded and included recordings of your 1994 protest. Can you tell us how you found out about the site and were moved to do this work on Staten Island, which I think is an incredibly important borough to do this work?
Yeah, well, the woman who got us involved was Amy Corey, and she came to the archives and was doing the Lesbian History Archives and was doing, she came to do some research and to use some material that we had about Alice Austen. And she started talking about the fact that she couldn't get to do her research because she had done her thesis about, she was doing her thesis about Alice Austen, and she gave a talk at the Staten Island Historical Society, and it was covered, and then it was put into the newspapers. And even though they had at that time been letting her do research at the Alice Austen House, suddenly they made that very difficult for her. And I said, well, somebody should do something about that. And I suggested that she come to the Lesbian Avenger meeting and raise it as a possibility of an action. And so she did. She came to the Lesbian Avengers and she basically explained what had gone on. And we were really up for doing an action. We said, sure, we'll go there and we'll do something about it. And it turned out that in the summer, it was in the summer, and they have a nautical day. I think it's called Nautical Day, and it's their main fundraiser. So we thought, wow, this would be great. We would have such a good time. So, so we figured out how to do something. We knew that we were going to go there on Nautical Day. We decided that we would dress like turn of the century bathers, and we used an inner tire, an inner tube, and made a lesbian preserver, actually a couple of them, to bring with us. And then Anne McGuire and Marie Honan and myself and Lisa DeVore and a friend of my gay male friend of mine, Ed Rogowski, came up with songs, parodies of shanties, like sailor shanties. So things like ho ho homosexual, Alice and Gertrude were lesbians, and we are as well. And so we did it. We made up a whole group of songs. Okay, and we also Anne and Carrie Moyer put together a pamphlet that was exactly, we had gone out to Alice Austen House and gotten things and looked at the space. And so we got this pamphlet that they always gave out about it, Alice Austen and Alice Austen House. And they rewrote it and named it a national lesbian landmark, which it now is. But that's what it said. And it had all the history, and it used all the photographs of hers where she had her friends in drag and the three women in a bed and a whole range of other, and the very famous one that a lot of people know of two women dancing. And those photos were included in the brochure that we were going to hand out to everybody, because Amy asked if we could go there and do help her leaflet. And I said, that's nothing like to leaflet. Okay, we could do something better than that. So it ended up being 32 of us who took the ferry over to Staten Island. By the way, the Alice Austen ferry. And we did not plan that. It just happened that that was the ferry that was next that would get us there on time. So we took the Alice Austen ferry, and then we walked from the ferry to the Nautical Day, singing on the way, and went on the grounds and marched around singing. And then we danced. There were women, they lined up, and then we all lined up, and we had photos of Alice Austen's. So when we said things like in the songs, like Alice Austen on a bike, we could show the photo that shows women on bikes. Okay. And we did a whole thing, and Anne reminded me that it included there was a group there that were doing sailor shanties, and it became like a call and response. They did one, we did one. They did one, we did one. Okay. And then when we were finished, we just walked around and left. We did a final circle, but we went into the Alice Austen House and put all these brochures in there. There may be some there today hiding somewhere, unless Victoria has found them all.
I didn't find them in our
also,
archive.
What? Excuse
I
me?
didn't find them in our archive. They
Find
came
them in
from
your-
the Her
right.
Story archives. But we've certainly made sure to now make copies of those.
Right,
And
right.
I had a lot of fun also working out the tunes to the songs that you wrote and singing the one that was set to the tune of Yellow Submarine.
Yes. Who
And
helped? Somebody helped us write that one. I'm trying to remember who, but I can't. Anne will remember who. And then we also, again, we did something that was, and we went back home. We happened to get the Alice Austen ferry again. Purely by chance. We did not try to get the Alice Austen ferry either direction. but she found us. But again, we didn't just do something that was fun. Then Anne called up the board about us coming and meeting with the board. A lot of it never went anywhere because they were stonewalling everything. But obviously, and this is something that is true about activism in general, you never know what your actions will bring.
That's right.
Okay. It doesn't happen immediately. It doesn't have to happen immediately because you're putting that out in the world and different people see it. Like at that action, there were 3 young women who questioned how we could do that and why we were doing that. And wouldn't we alienate people? And later on in the day, they went over to the board chair and asked him why he wasn't dealing with the fact that Alice Austen was a lesbian. 3 young women who were asking us and complaining that maybe we were making it worse, and and then it obviously got to them because then they went over and talked to him. So somewhere it can reverberate, and it may not be today and it may not be tomorrow, but it will be sometime. And you have to believe that because eventually, as you know, you're the first lesbian director of Alice Austen House, and now you're making, sure that other people know her history, and that's the way activism works.
Yes, and it hasn't actually been an easy road for me either. The first few years were, you had to have a very, very thick skin. And, when you talk about the board, they had fired 2 previous directors for wanting to talk about Alice and Gertrude. And in particular, Mitchell Grubler, who actually appears in The Female Closet, he was a real champion of Alice and Gertrude. And, he was fired lickety-split for that. And that's where, unfortunately, boards wield power, and they can do so much good. And I'm so happy to say that the Alice Austen board today is incredibly diverse, includes many lesbians, and is so supportive of this work. But it wasn't, it just hasn't always been that way. And it doesn't mean that they were necessarily bad people. They wanted to be involved with a nonprofit, but they certainly only wanted their own narrative of Alice to be told. And we can't truly understand Alice's work and her life at all in any way, shape, or form without talking about Gertrude and the woman that came before, because they were and fascinating woman, all of the women in Alice's life. So yes, you've got this 50th anniversary of the archive and the 30th anniversary of your action, and it was so wonderful to display some of the photographs. I know there's many more that also documented the action, but the wonderful photographs of Saskia Scheffer, who is also a part of this series.
She took great photos, yeah.
So one thing that I was remiss in saying at the beginning, is I get always very excited to have these conversations, was that we have time for Q&A to, there are some questions in the chat that I can cover, but please flood the chat with some questions. I'm going to ask Maxine what she thinks of us. Sometimes I unpin us and have us all on a screen and people can raise their hands, because I do love the slightly live format, even though we're on Zoom. I think it's more akin to, the organizing and being able to actually let people ask questions and have their voice heard. Is that okay with you, Maxine, if I do that?
Of course, of course.
Okay, so I'm really going to open it up, and I am looking at the chat. If you're shy to be heard, that's fine, or you can take yourself off video. Please do. I will open it up now. I'm going to unpin myself. Oh, hold on a second. And we're all here. I see some hands straight away. Please, if you've raised your hand in any particular order and I'm not quite getting it right, I'm gonna ask Sam Master first. Would you like to unmute and ask a question?
Yes. Hello, Alice. Hello, everyone. I am so
Hi.
excited to be to hear this conversation. And also very glad that you all did not parachute in on Whitney Houston's wedding, because sorry, that just no. But I really want to know. I identify as an organizer, and I am very curious about two things. One is, what was the transition like from the first meeting to the second meeting that gave women who had never been involved in activism, how did you bring them back to the second meeting? And my second question is, what were the conversations around race that you all had inside of the Lesbian Avengers, like at that particular time?
Well, what brought women back, I think, was the structure that we created, which was, this is your organization. And we immediately started talking about what we could do. And wasn't the six of us that talked, we got other people to talk about it and put them and ask people what committees they thought we should need and what did they want to be on. And, so my thing is that people have to own their, have to own the organization. They can't be foot soldiers for somebody else. And I've always felt that way about the archives too. When people are interning at the archives, they don't go and get us coffee. They immediately are asked what they want to do, and do they want, is there something they want to, specifically take over? And I believe that we need to pass things on. So when you organize, you have to have that philosophy. At least I think you have to have that philosophy that you're passing it on. Because you're going to die someday, and there has to be somebody else around who's going to do the work, who's going to carry on. So it's the way I think about things.
And the archives is proof of that in action.
Excuse me?
The archives is proof of that in action.
Yes, definitely. The Lesbian History Archives. And in terms of race, well, we did a lot of discussion of that, about the rainbow curriculum, about the fact that it wasn't just about lesbian and gay, gay issues being brought into the curriculum, that it was a far larger issue. The Lesbian Avengers was never a majority at all, people of color organization, but there were women of color in the Avengers. And they took pretty major roles. And in fact, Anasimo was Cuban, and one of the founders, but also like Marlene Colburn, who with me ended up forming the Dyke March Committee. She was in the Avengers. Chanel Matthews, who's now Chanel Elaine, she was one of the people who went to Idaho as part of a 6-person group that organized against the anti-lesbian and gay propositions in 1994. So there were people who were part of the Avengers that were very significant. Valerie Kamea, who was an Asian American lesbian, Valerie Walker, who's now doing work on the Dyke March Committee. So that was really how that came in, but how it started coming in was coming into the rainbow curriculum.
Thank you so much. I think the second hand I saw raised was Amelia. Amelia, would you like to share your question?
Yes, I would love to. Thank you so much, Maxine, for sharing your story. It's really wonderful to hear from an inside perspective, really, on how everything happened and came about. My question was, what do you think the role of archiving is for a younger generation of queers and lesbians? And like, how can we use the archive not in a passive way, but in an active way moving forward?
I think archiving in general is incredibly important for younger people, as it is for everyone else, but specifically to make sure that people understand the history. I think that's incredibly significant. Not just the history of activism, but the history of lesbians, because it's important to know how people have been treated, to understand that you are not the first generation, to see examples of what people have done, to figure out whether that is something you want to do or not. I think that the archives, as we say, you know, the memories of the people we have lost, you know, you need to know what has come before, or you won't be able to figure out where you fit in that scheme of things. It's not a matter of repeating what other people have done. It's using it as inspiration, I think. And, you know, people come to the archives and they are blown away because they never knew there were 12,000 books by and about lesbians. They never knew that all of these topics could have information. We have like a subject file that we call Lesbians and, that has 1,500 subjects, ranging from housing to specific ethnicities, to AIDS, to theater, to writing, to film, to name it, it's there. And I think and organizations, so that you can see what other organizers have done.
It's an
So
incredible
I think it's
resource.
incredibly important for young people.
And it's very sort of ethical archiving. Certainly when I've delved into some of Alice Austen's archives that are held in other places, I see things that are being buried, and then also the danger of things being lost. I'd like to ask Joan Nessel, if you've got your hand raised, if you'd like to unmute.
Yes. Oh, it was wonderful to hear Max and see all your faces. I just, as an 84-year-old who came out in the 50s, this is not, I mean, it's not a question, but to say, first, young people also, they're not, when you come to the archives, you're not just the passive look at the past, you're bringing the new categories of your own histories. So you're making the archives green. So that, but what I wanted to say, as someone who remembers times going back to the 40s, and when I was in the bars, there were women there who'd come out in the 20s. When you think about a lesbian past, don't think about paucity. Don't think just about victimization. Don't think just about isolation. There were amazing formations for sexuality, for socializing, for social support. All you have to do is look at Miss Hampton's life and see the different kinds of community formation. So that's all my voice, you know, 84, but always not only look to the future of what you can do, but see the past in a different way. It was full of lesbians and others who were declared unwanted peoples, opening up life Thank you so much, Max. I learned so much.
Well, I wanted to second what you were saying because I think that one of the things that I'm always saying to younger women who are involved, younger people who are involved in activism is, you think that that you're the first generation that's out, but that in all those past times, there were women who were incredibly brave. Not just that they made things like parties and whatever for a specific grouping, but who were visible in the world and took that chance to be visible. They wrote books. They made plays that were not just for the lesbian community and that got them into a lot of trouble, but they did it anyway. So bravery is not confined to modern times. There were many brave women and lesbians many years ago.
So I think
So
we
I
just have
totally agree with
sorry,
you.
Maxine. I didn't want to cut you off. I just have time for a last question. I know there was a couple of questions in the chat, and I welcome anyone to email me, and then I can connect with Maxine and anyone else at the archives to answer questions. Michelle, you were the last hand raised that I saw next.
Hi, thank you. Thank you so much, Maxine. Thank you, Joan.
Hi.
You're both significant to me. I own Women Crafts in Provincetown. We're a lesbian bookstore that's been open for almost 50 years. And I'm the third owner, so I'm newer to the story and younger generation of activism. But I just wanted to share that we read from the Lesbian Avenger handbook at the start of a lot of our feminist readings, and I just wanted to ask about the language that I see in newsletters from Lesbian Avengers, and the language particularly of the start of the Dyke March is so obviously inclusive and intersectional in a way that I feel like lesbians and the women's community can get tripped up about nowadays, and that there's this desire to separate us, and that second wave feminism is TERFs and queer younger social justice warriors like don't meet. And there seems to have been no problem, like your language, and I know Sarah Schulman's a genius, I'm friendly with her, and I know like the team you worked with, the group of women that were together doing this, I'm so impressed by. But was there any struggle to understand like that you were both celebrating what's particular about lesbians while not separating, isolating, being exclusive and harmful to any other community? Can you talk a little bit about that, and also maybe how the other groups received you?
I think I'm going to go back to lesbian feminism. I mean, I think that there's a way, it's hard to explain, but we never argued about that stuff. I mean, all of us, and I'll speak for myself, there's something inside me that tells me what's ethical. And that comes, a lot of that comes from lesbian feminism. There were a set of values, even if they never or didn't always act on them. Okay, but they were values of inclusiveness. Sometimes driving you crazy, but you know, in terms of like listening to everybody and not wanting to offend anybody and blah 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 blah. Okay, but there was a process, and I believe in process. I believe in you know, having a set of values that you live by, and a vision of a world that you want, and trying to make that world today to the extent that you can. You know, when people talk, say TERF, I say, I am a radical feminist lesbian. Okay. Like, how do you include me? You know, I want people to understand that you don't just throw out terminology like that you need to look at people. You need to look at the individuals. you need to understand where they're coming from, not understand their biases, but understand that when you use a category like that and you sort of paint everyone with the same brush, you are overlooking the nuances, the differences, the ways that people engage with the world. So we never argued, we came together and we all knew that we had that point of view. You know, it wasn't something that we had to hammer out and write a set of principles about. They were there. So,
Thank you, Maxine.
yeah.
We're just out of time now tonight. I have invited anyone to reach out to me with any additional questions. Sometimes there's something we think of afterwards. For anyone that watches this as a recording, my email is justvictoria@aliceausten.org. I'm always open to talking more. Love conversations at the Alice Austen House, and we have an incredible team. Thank you so much, Maxine.
Well, I would tell people to make sure to listen to the other
Oh,
people who
absolutely.
speak.
So you want to sign up for all 4 of these talks, 100%. And whoever would like to unmute to give Maxine a little whoop or a big whoop for all of the work that she's done, I invite that now. Woo!
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Have a safe and wonderful good night.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.